All right, so I thought I'd talk today about the concept of synchronicity. Um, so synchronicity was a concept developed by Carl Jung. Uh, Pretty much what it is in its essence is uncausally related coincidences. So coincidences that kind of link what's going on in your external world to I guess you could say the internal psyche. So Carl Jung gives a pretty notable example. He talks about a lady who he was treating, and she was describing a dream to him about a golden scarab. So a golden scarab is, or was, a symbol of transformation in ancient Egypt. And she had recounted this as an object that had come up in one of her dreams, which is kind of interesting because dreams often serve as the subconscious is the psyche's way of revealing potential paths of transformation, or to the best of its ability, revealing the way forward. So it's kind of interesting that that was the item that revealed itself in her dream. Now it's important to take into account that he described her as a very rational person, someone who wasn't necessarily open to these kind of revelations or what her dream could reveal. So while he was having one of these sessions with her, they heard a tapping on the window, and it turned out to be a scarab beetle, which was, by his account, an incredibly rare occurrence. So he went over to the window, he opened up the window, and there was the bug, and he goes over, he hands it to her and says, "Here's your golden scarab." So obviously there's no there's no correlation between her dream and an external event that happens afterwards, yet this is what would pretty much be a perfect example of the concept of synchronicity, and what kind of opened her up to being open to the idea of personal transformation in her own life. So with that being said, I'd like to share an experience of synchronicity in my own life and some of the lessons that I learned I'd just like to get out and share. So this is about a month or so ago now, but I was having a discussion with one of my really close friends. We were on the phone for 45 minutes or so, and at one point in the conversation, we started talking about relationships. And he knows that I'm a pretty introspective person, so he knows there was these questions I was asking myself over the last couple of years about relationships. And oftentimes it's the case that people don't necessarily gain a full sense of closure in some of the different aspects of their life. So he knew that, especially at the beginning of when I was going through a breakup a couple years ago, that there were questions that I felt were unanswered, I guess you could say. So he asked if if the opportunity presented itself, if I would want to go ahead and ask this person some of the questions that I had initially had, to kind of, like I said, gain some sense of closure, I guess is the best way to put it. But we hadn't spoken about this, the topic about past relationships in quite some time. And it was about 3, 4, 5 days later that my my boss, who's an awesome guy, he comes over to me and says that he says, "How would you feel about coaching with my ex, who I hadn't seen in over 2 years?" So that was kind of like the beginning of like an unlikely coincidence, but caught me off guard, caught me by surprise. It was interesting too because it was the next day that I get another message from another person who I had been briefly seeing, who I hadn't heard from in months. That kind of just came out of the blue. And while this was going on, I had set up just a date with another girl who I was going to see over that weekend. When the thing about my ex came up, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go ahead and go on the date, just because it brought up a lot of emotions from the past. But decided to go ahead and continue on with it. So ended up going on a date with another girl, and it was kind of like another unlikely coincidence here, where the place that I went on the date with this other girl took me to pretty much next door to another girl who I had seen for a couple months right next door. So it was within the span of like a 5-day period, it was like nothing to everything. And I know I might be jumping from place to place, but it was a couple weeks before all this that I was going through some of my belongings, and I had come across some of the items that I had shared with the first ex-girlfriend, and there were a couple pieces that I wasn't necessarily ready to let go of. And I'll come back to that, but so I went on the date with this girl, and it turned out to be a really nice person. And it's interesting with these things, because although you can understand a concept conceptually, sometimes there are like moments when you have to actually go ahead and experience them before you can actually kind of quote unquote know. And I say this because like on the date with this other person that I had gone on, it showed that like although that a person can be hurting, that like there's room for hope, and that although things might not necessarily be the greatest in the moment, that things can turn out better, and oftentimes do. So wasn't quite sure exactly where I was going with that train of thought, but getting back to the point of the story with synchronicity was, there's all these unlikely events, and so often is it the case that there's going to be the tendency to want to kind of run away and hide yourself from these situations, because my boss who had brought up the fact that this might be happening, he said, and which was great on him, he said that he wanted to make sure that it was something I was comfortable with, and that it didn't necessarily have to be the case that that you had to go ahead and say like yes to this, but and it's the same thing with going on the date, where it's like when something brings up a lot of memories from the past, that the tendency might want to be to kind of retreat into yourself and not continue living your life as you are going about doing so. So the point of that is, that if you're willing to say, no matter what kind of fear or discomfort that I'm experiencing here, no matter what kind of hesitation, if I can be the kind of person, if you can be the kind of person who says, regardless of the fact of the fear, of the doubt, of the insecurity, that I'm going to be the one who voluntarily confronts these elements of your past, then it's almost like if you can develop yourself into that kind of person, then you open yourself up to very, very profound personal transformations, I guess you could say. Because if you're the type of person who's willing to go ahead and face your fears, and face the kind of unknown, because a lot of the time when you're dealing with these kind of things, you don't know how you're going to react in those kind of moments. And like, especially when it's just like, it all comes at once. It's like from 0 to 100. If you can find the courage within yourself that can be developed and is there if you're willing to let it come out of you, I guess you could say, then like I said, you just don't know the extent to where that courage can lead you. So the one other interesting piece that I think I might finish off with is when all of these things kind of convalesce together, it could be very interesting because, like, in some senses, there's transformations and oftentimes transformations are accompanied by almost like a lifting of a burden, which is certainly what I had felt when I decided to voluntarily confront this experience. But it's interesting. I found it so often the case that in the process of overcoming these burdens, sometimes it's like the load that you carry in one area of your life kind of shifts to another. So, like a quick story, the day that my boss had come to me and told me that this might be the case was I had decided to go and I wasn't initially planning on going to train jiu-jitsu that night, but I really felt like I needed to clear my head. So went over and trained. And it was like I said, it was an emotional time for me. It was a challenging time. And I went through a role with a guy and completely lost in the moment. I don't necessarily know that I was completely lost in the moment because I felt like there was so much emotion kind of pent up inside. And it's almost like I went into that training session with it's like almost like willing to die on the mats, but not in the sense that like I'm there to like hurt anyone, obviously, but where it's just like you get into those zones sometimes. Anyways, the point of this is that he eventually caught me in a submission, and like I said, I was like almost willing to die on the mat that night, and ended up hurting my arm, which is my coaching arm, which is the arm that I use to coach tennis. But it's interesting because after I came out of that training session, I really felt a kind of burden lift off my shoulders, in one sense, but then in another sense, like that came at a cost. So anyways, it's in like the point of that is that there are times when you're going to be going through things where the conduit, what actually gets you from one place to another place, might come at a cost. And sometimes you have to be willing to pay the cost to overcome the burdens that you had carried up until that point. So I think that's pretty much it for today.